My father, sister, and I started a large construction job on my aunt's second home a year ago. We started out living in the house we were working on, but have now decided that it's probably better to commute, if possible. This is largely due to a number of paranormal occurrences that have made us quite paranoid about the place. When my father first arrived at the house, he took a look at the attic and noticed three old Art Deco tiles that were placed carefully on a window ledge. However, when I first had a look at the attic, I told him that the tiles were all lying face down on the floor. He said that nobody had been to the property and that he didn't move the tiles himself. There was also a dead starling on the floor, so I just assumed that the poor thing had found its way into the attic, crashed into the window, died, and knocked the tiles over in the process. I was still a little creeped out by the attic because there were copious amounts of dead wood lice scattered throughout the attic. I never once saw a living one there. A week or so into the job, we begin to notice that our tools keep going missing and turning up in strange places. Our power tools were frequently being inexplicably unplugged. It was then that my father and sister began to suspect that there was a poltergeist. I thought they were being paranoid. They decided to ask the neighbours about the previous occupants of the house. It turned out that the house was previously owned by an elderly lady that had no living relatives and never spoke to anyone. She fell over and broke her hip in the conservatory. 3 days later, she succumbed to dehydration. At this point, I started to suspect that the house could be haunted. I wasn't sure, but I was keeping an open mind. Things started to get much weirder after that. Everything the lady had owned had been removed from the house when she died, with the exception of two objects: a metal pin depicting the Virgin Mary and an old moth-eaten bathrobe. I admit that this was in rather poor taste, but I would frequently put the bathrobe on to keep my sister out. Everybody found it funny, and I didn't think anything of it. Later, I wished I hadn't done this. One night, my family and I were looking at the bathrobe and discussing it. It began to really creep me out, so I balled it up, hid it under some tools in the garage, and tried to pretend it didn't exist. The garage didn't have any lights, and nobody saw where I hid it. Hence, it was particularly alarming for me when I decided to go to sleep that night and found it lying in my bed. We left that night because my sister couldn't stop crying. There was no way that this could have been a prank. When we returned, the strange occurrences continued. I was awakened one night when a mirror on the bedside table somehow hit me in the head. My father took to wearing a crucifix and said that he saw it float from underneath his shirt and hit him in the eye. I was a little suspicious of this story, but his black eye did lend a little credence to it. As the months passed by, we experienced other strange things. We heard footsteps in the kitchen in the middle of the night. We smelled lavender at times when lavender wasn't in bloom. None of us wear lavender oil or even anything resembling it, so this was very strange. We discovered a number of house centipedes in the property. This was strange because they're virtually unheard of in the UK, but it seemed to explain the dead wood lice I mentioned earlier. We awoke one morning to find a line of dirt appeared across the threshold. We were so paranoid at this point that we immediately assumed it was some kind of protection spell, and it was only later we realised that the wind had blown it under the front door. At this point, we decided it was best thing for our mental health to minimise the amount of time we spent in the property and commute when it was reasonable. I haven't been to the property for a few days. There's been little to do, so I've been at home taking a break from it all. I can't seem to get away from this shit though. Yesterday, a picture of my father somehow fell from the wall. It hasn't been tampered with at all. The frame was in good condition, and so was the hook that was used to keep it up. The glass is broken in the frame though, which is annoying. So this led me to question if it is possible for a poltergeist to follow someone to another location. Does anybody have any thoughts regarding this? Can anybody offer a more reasonable explanation than this being a poltergeist? We live in a newer home that we had built. We moved in 2018. Ever since we moved in, I would hear things like footsteps or scratching. I would see what appeared to be shadows. It got to be as much as a forceful tap on my shoulder. This has gone since we moved in. I'm home most of the time by myself. My wife and daughter are gone during the school hours while I work from home. I have 2 dogs that mostly sleep all day in a dog bed behind me. This means I shouldn't hear anything occurring outside of the immediate room I'm in. Recently, my daughter has said that she no longer feels safe alone in her room at night, also in the basement. She's 9. We explained to her that there's nothing to be afraid of and that she has both dogs to keep her company at night. She replies that the dogs no longer feel safe either. That's a hard one to understand. So in the last 2 weeks or so, we've moved her furniture upstairs. My office remains down there, however. Since moving her room to the main floor, she claims to feel at ease and that she can sleep at night. One big thing, however, now I feel somewhat terrified to work downstairs during the day. That's hard to explain. I feel like all day I'm being watched. I feel brushes of cold air. One of the dogs, Luna, came down the hall the other way and froze halfway. She got really low to the ground and basically crawled into the office. She had this terrified look about her. She looked like someone was yelling at her or about to hit her. For the record, we do not hit our dogs, but she just had that look like she was getting swatted. When she got to me, she was shaking. So I called for Daisy to come into the other room, our other dog. She came down the hall and started to growl as she walked past the part where Luna had just been. She went quickly around the corner, turned around, and she stared down the hall. She was as stiff as a board and didn't move for several minutes, despite me calling her over and over again. I managed to capture a full minute of her stance. It creeped me out. Clearly, both dogs saw something that I could not see. This has played into some of my fears and makes me wonder if my daughter not feeling safe anymore is related. More so in the last few weeks, I've also found lights that should be off and others that are never on. And again, I'm the only one home. So something is happening or my mind is playing tricks on me. There have also been a few neighbours that have complained of issues lately. Things being moved, TVs turning on when no one is home, pets getting locked in rooms, or dogs and cats fixating on things that shouldn't be there. How can we find out the spiritual history of our land? Before we planned that evening, I did some research and found some descriptions on how to act and behave in these spooky sessions. One thing that was mentioned in almost all the tutorials was that you have to be open-minded and not act all that pessimistic about it. And you also have to decide who's going to be the medium, and that happened to me throughout the whole session. I don't want to, and more importantly, can't go into full detail, because too much happened. So we came fully prepared, white candles. It was around 12 o'clock. The whole alphabet placed carefully around the wooden table. And me as the one who talks. When people ask me if I believe in paranormal stuff, or I believe in God and all that stuff, I always tell them no, but I'm not ruling it out. So we started, and I began to ask questions. We were 4 people. One was a really good friend of mine, and the other 2 were girls with whom we hung out at the time. We all had one thing in common. We were interested in paranormal stuff and wondered if it would actually work. The one thing I always asked was, is someone here? And after some time, the glass started to slightly move in a direction, and the entity spelled gibberish stuff which made no sense. But even so, we were all fascinated by the fact that the glass moved. After some trial and error and another "is someone here" question, the glass went to the piece of paper with the word yes on it. I asked, "What's your name?" And the glass started to move to the letters P-E-T-E-R. And then I asked some questions. Basic stuff. Nothing really important, and damn, it actually worked. I could ask something and the glass would move very precisely to the letters and form whole sentences. Again, I don't want to go into full detail. I'm not trying to convince people here to believe me. I want to tell you about the thing that happened after Peter. After some time and a lot of questions, Peter suddenly stopped responding and I asked if he was still there. And then the glass moved to no. I asked her who it was and no joke, the glass started to move more aggressively and spell the word Satan. I found it very absurd and the sentence, "Oh shut up," left my mouth. The second I finished saying this, the glass started to move rapidly to the letters "Be quiet, Bush." FYI, my last name is Bush. I remember that I felt irritated. My homie also looked very shocked. I started to think of things to ask about. I asked how my first day at the new school will be. The glass immediately started to move and sped, "Everyone will hate you." One thing is that I forgot to mention, there was a rule that you have to ask permission to leave the session or else the ghost will haunt you. At least that's what people say. This could all be bullshit, of course, but we still try to follow those rules. So anyway, Satan didn't want us to leave and threatened us with the word death a lot. This went on until 4 in the morning and it kind of stressed us all out. In the end, the glass didn't respond anymore and we called it quits. Okay, so I used to walk back to my home from college. I always got to my house around 8 or 9 PM, and almost every time my mum was at the garage using her phone. And I didn't have keys for some reason, so every time I got there, she opened the garage door for me. One day I got to the garage door, and I saw her. But as soon as I told her, "Hey, can you open it?" she stood up and went into the house and closed the door. So I was like, okay, that was weird, but she probably didn't hear me. Then I called my brother and told him if he can open the door for me. So he came, and I went inside the house looking for my mom to tell her, "Hey, I was there, and you didn't hear me." But I soon realised my mom wasn't there. I asked my brother if he was at the garage, and he showed me he was playing video games. It's hard to describe how odd this feels to me, because I'm pretty sure that what I saw was a person. It wasn't one of those times you would kind of see some shadow in like a split second. This time, I had plenty of time to look at the figure. I'd say like 10 seconds or more. And to this day, there's no explanation to it. One thing I'd like to add is that my grandma took a few plants from her mom's house. And one of those plants remained in an old pot plant. So my grandma was moving the plant to a new one. And when she dug up, she found a little glass jar that was wrapped with some papers. And the papers had something written on them, but nothing readable. The glass jar also felt and sounded like it had some type of liquid and some rock or hard thing inside it. As soon as my grandma saw it, she said, "That's witchcraft." She was pretty convinced and didn't allow me to open that jar in my house. She showed it to her sister and she told her that it was definitely a hex and that she can call a priest to get rid of it and clean our house. I sometimes think about the jar. It looked so weird, and it was crazy how my grandma quickly knew it was witchcraft. But in the country I live in, people are really superstitious. And also my grandma told me she's seen one of those before. It first started a few months ago, when my girlfriend said she heard sounds from inside our apartment. I dismissed it as nothing, said it had to be the TV or our neighbours or whatever. This happened a few times. I never really believed her until weeks or so ago when I first heard it myself. It seems to happen at night. It happened just 10 minutes ago at 10:58 or just before 11 PM. Tonight, I heard it for the 4th time and it's starting to get to me. The weirdest thing is that I know the sound. It sounds exactly like a toy I had as a small child, where you would spin a stick and a ballerina would spin slowly in circles, as the melody was being played by little bells, I believe. It kind of works like one of those clowns in a box, where you spin it and it jump scares you as it opens the box. I've currently heard the sound from 3 different rooms, and never actually been able to hear from what room it comes from, or locate what the source is. I seriously don't know what's causing this melody to play for a few seconds every night or every other night, seemingly. At first I didn't care much and dismissed it, but it's starting to scare me. Weird thing is also that this all started when my grandmother started getting really sick. And because it was my girlfriend who detected it and has heard it multiple times herself, I know I'm not going crazy. What am I going to do? I used one a few times with a few friends. Nothing was really happening at first, and us being the retards that we are trying to impress the girls we were with, started calling out to anything. Even demons. After that, we made contact with something and proceeded to ask it questions. We got a name, Garth, who apparently died in a car fire some years ago. We began to ask where in the room it was and answered. We asked for it to move an object in the room. Nothing moved, but we did hear noise from the other room. Anyways, after talking to Garth for about 30 minutes, we started to get bored and we were wrapping up the convo and told it we were going to end the session now. At which point, the planchette went to no. We asked if it was alright for us to go. As soon as we went to say goodbye again, it went to no. After the second no, the planchette started to act weird and the atmosphere in the room changed. The planchette started moving in a circular motion and kept trying to go off the edge of the board. At which point, we decided to just end the session. Upon all four of us bringing it to goodbye, the planchette stopped in the middle of the board, as if it was glued in place. The girls freaked out and took their hands off the planchette. At which point, my buddy and I proceeded to end the session and bring it to goodbye. For about 5 seconds, the planchette didn't move, as the two of us tried to move it. At which point my buddy and I had to both hands like palm and all onto the planchette and forcefully drag it to goodbye. It took all our might to actually move it to goodbye. Upon trying to move the planchette, the board itself looked like it was being pulled in the opposite direction. Now some could say it was my buddy messing with me, but we were sitting next to each other and the girls were sitting across from us. So there was no way that my buddy could have been pulling in the opposite direction or holding it in place, as I could feel him always pulling my hands as well. I know we didn't end the session properly, and after typing this, I looked back and realised the two girls in the past 2 years, one lost her partner, baby daddy, and the other was just in a serious car wreck where she broke her spine. Makes me start to think if it could have something to do with their hands not being on the board. Way back in 8th grade, I had a friend John, who years before had his house burned and deemed unlivable. Now being a kid full of confidence and not fully believing it, me and another friend called bullshit that said the burned house was haunted. Finally one day, John agrees and we go see this house, as his family still had the keys, and it was on his way home. Walking up to the place, John had told us about several experiences in the house. From a large Civil War looking soldier to energy balls and children's laughter that would appear and disappear. Taking this information, we still called bullshit and went inside the house. The inside of the house was fine, as the garage had burned, making it a hazard but safe enough to explore. The inside of the house felt strange, zero airflow but no dust, and at first dead silence. After walking in and essentially walking straight to the garage entrance and the back door, to show the fire marks and point out where John had found arrowheads in his backyard, we decided to look around more. Very soon after, we started walking towards their old rooms. We all very faintly heard music. The strangest part is that each of us heard entirely different genres. We reached John's sister's old room, and it was barren, of course, and the windows were covered, but nothing weird. Then the same with John's old room. Between the two of them, most of the apparitions had started and then gone and disappeared into John's parents' room. Logically, that was our next and final step of the tour. Confused by indescribable music and getting nervous, we reached John's parents' room and tried the door. It felt sealed, like when something heavy is against it or a vacuum is applying pressure. However, the house was sealed and we were supposedly the first ones inside in a long time. With a good shove, we managed to open and got the biggest gust of stale, dead, musty air I've ever had. Freaked out by the sudden gust that smelled like death had once been there, we took off. Halfway crossing the street, Jim called out, "Hey guys, look at the house." Nervous that we would find all three of us turned and saw a huge apparition in the window. Solid looking, but you had to stare and squint hard to start to get the edges of details. And it was watching us staring us down from inside. Obviously freaked out, we ran all the way to John's current house. This story takes place about 12 to 13 years ago, when I was a kid. I come from a less than desirable area, in a small mountain community where most people just managed to scrape by. This meant for me and my siblings, we lived in a small house that could barely fit us, with poor insulation and was in desperate need of repairs. But we made it work and appreciated what our parents could do, because we were still better off than a lot of the other families we knew. The winters are harsh here in the mountains, and because of the poor insulation, me and my siblings would sleep in the living room as close to the fire as possible, and would huddle under our one huge blanket. There's one night that sticks to me to this day, because for the life of me, I still cannot fathom what it was I saw. It was late at night, and I've always been a very poor sleeper, so I would wake up through most of the night already. Not to mention we were struggling to keep warm. When I woke up very suddenly, and felt like there was someone or something there. I initially shrugged this off because we had a few busted windows and holes in the floor, which would allow the occasional opossum or stray cat to wander in. And in the winter, this was actually a fairly common occurrence. With the light of the TV that was still playing, I looked around, and to my left, I saw this thing. It had the body of a turtle, but was rather edgy and spiked, but not to a point more like Mayan temples in a face that is most comparable to, I guess, a sort of lion or dragon mix. Almost like an alligator snapping turtle, and that it was large and frightening, but had a brachycephalic nose, and it was a mouth with teeth, not a beak. It was looking at my little brother, and I moving his head slowly back and forth, out of fear that I would cause it to bite one of us, if it noticed I was awake. I laid there with my eyes barely open. Just in case it was aggressive, I could wake up my brother before it could hurt us. All he did, though, was glance between us a few times and very slowly walk to that stairway that led down to the bathroom and somehow went down the steps without making a sound. This was confusing, since my dad's friend has a large sulcata tortoise, and I knew that an animal with a shell that large was not graceful and should be clunking down each step, or at least the first drop. I chalked it up to a bad dream and later thought sleep paralysis was possible, but that still didn't quite fit. Years later, my brother and I were hanging out with our friends and they were talking about ghosts, when my brother started telling the same story with the same description and how he just shut his eyes and prayed it would leave. This is why I thought he was still asleep and I had never told him or anyone this story. What did we see? All that pops up online are dragon turtles, which would be far too huge, and lion turtles from that show Avatar. Yesterday was my birthday, and my girlfriend had put up some happy birthday balloons on the wall. I'm an American living in Vietnam, and have been here for the past 6 years. Just for a little backstory, I grew up in California and have lived all over the West Coast for most of my life. My father was a Vietnam veteran and passed away about 7 years ago. He had a very bad head injury that wasn't getting better, and he took his life. He was in a lot of pain, and we all understood why he did what he did. We all miss him dearly, but are thankful he's not in any more pain or misery. My father was an eclectic man. He had his own wit, his own humour, and even his own language. He would use words and phrases that he created, and everyone knew him for. One of his favourite words was the word baddie. It meant like the word buddy, but he made it sound like it was an A part, to make it more sound like baddie. And we spelled it B-A-H-D-Y. He would say things like, "Hey baddie, don't bring that junk over here," or "Hey baddie, bring the money." It was one of many words that he often used to get a laugh out of us, but mostly, he laughed just for himself. I lived and grew up in California, and have been a teacher for the past 20 years. After my father passed away, I looked at my life and decided that I wanted to move to Vietnam to be a teacher, where my father was a soldier. I never thought I would stay here this long, but here I am, still 6 years later. In the beginning, it felt like a pay it forward type of experience, but since then, it's become my dream and destination of choice. I'll get married soon to a beautiful Vietnamese woman, and we put a down payment on our first apartment. Living and giving here has brought a purpose to my life, and the old cliches of do what you love and find your purpose in life ring true for me here. I'll forever feel honoured and thankful to be an American teaching in Vietnam, and thankful my father's path brought me here. So back to my story and the birthday balloons. We've been on a soft lockdown for the past few months. Vietnam was great at avoiding COVID in the beginning, but now that strategy isn't feasible. They're slowly rolling out vaccinations, and we really aren't able to go out to celebrate or enjoy milestones with friends at this time. So my girlfriend made my birthday extra special and got a cake, bought a gift, and put up some balloons on the wall that said happy birthday. After a few minutes, some of the letters fell off the wall. We put them back up, and a few minutes later, they fell off again. We added more tape to the balloons and put them back up. After 20 or 30 minutes, the letters fell off again, and we just left them on the ground. We had a nice dinner. I opened a gift, and we had some amazing cake, and it was a very nice birthday. About 5 hours later, we were getting ready for bed, and I walked through the living room and looked at the birthday sign. I realised that the happy word was untouched, but the bottom said so much more to me. The letters that remained were Buddy. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. I froze in that moment as I was filled with bewilderment, excitement, relief, and an overwhelming sense of calm. Tears filled my eyes as I realised that my father had been with me all this time, or at least he visits me. I've always felt that he was with me, and a few signs in the past have made me think that, but nothing ever happened like this. It made me think of Ouija boards and psychics and all the things people can't explain. It also made me a little sad because I wondered how often spirits from the other side try to communicate, but either their signs go unnoticed, they're not given the right opportunity, or we just miss it or brush it off as a coincidence. The balloons gave my father the perfect opportunity to communicate with me in his language, and it's really the best gift I could have ever received. His message was adamant and deliberate, and I nearly missed it. When I was about 20, myself, my girlfriend, eventual wife, and another couple rented a huge old farmhouse in a little unincorporated town. It was in the middle of nowhere. Our yard was about 3 acres with the house on one end of the property and a janky garage on the other end. The layout of the old farmhouse is important to the story. The main house itself was built in the 1890s, but had additions put on over the years. I was told it was a bunkhouse originally for a mine in the area. Miners would sleep in it in shifts. First floor, walking through the back was a mudroom, with the washer and dryer, water heater, etc. Through another door was a large kitchen, sink, and cabinets on the right, stove on the immediate left. Walk into a living room. From here it's a very open concept, with 2 rooms on the left and right. Room on the right had the front door. Front door room became an office and second living room. The left room was a rotating music room, guest bedroom, whatever room. There was a lot of space. There was a full bathroom off the living room. In this bathroom, there was the rabbit hole, as we called it. It was a small door about 3 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide. This led to the basement. The basement was straight out a horror movie. One bare light bulb in the middle of the large room. Field stone walls, a couple of support beams, wonky, creaky stairs, and a weird, tiny room behind a door made out of an old pallet. Back to the first floor living room was stairs, up about 4 or 5 stairs, then a small landing and another 5 or 6 stairs to the top. When on the landing, you can turn around and see the entire upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a tiny bathroom. With a tiny window, you could see the entire backyard while sitting on the toilet. There were 3 bedrooms, one much smaller than the other 2, and it was at the very front of the house. Okay, Time for the paranormal stuff. Things were kind of weird. You felt like someone was always watching you. It didn't feel scary per se, but weird. We started making jokes that the ghost was watching us, not being serious, because our house isn't haunted. We would heart steering wait on the stairs, like someone was on the landing, shuffling around. Up a stair, down a stair, move around a bit. We all just sort of thought it was an old ass house. We had 2 cats. One was a Garfield and the other a tuxedo cat. But he was blind in one eye and never talked. No meow. He would just open his mouth like he was trying. They would constantly stop and listen to things in the house really intently. But the tuxedo cat would run upstairs and stay up there for a while. We thought that was cat stuff. Things started heating up. After a few weeks, we decided to have a party in the backyard. Nothing crazy. About 15 people that we all knew. Middle of summer, so most everyone is outside by the fire except a few people in the kitchen. I'm out back by the fire yucking it up when one of my friends says, "Who's that? Your grandma live here?" Then proceeds to point to my bedroom window. There was what appeared to be an old lady looking out the window into the backyard, hands against her face and glass, peering out. What the fuck? Is someone in my house? I start running towards the house. I can hear the chatter behind me. Someone's in the house. Same friend is following me. We get back in the door. Is someone upstairs? Everyone is saying, "I don't think so. We've been right here." I get to the landing on the stairs and look around and all the doors are open. My bedroom light is on. I proceed to check the upstairs and turn all the lights on. Nothing. No one. Let alone anyone that looked like an old lady. Eventually back out by the fire, we start an inevitable conversation. Maybe the house is haunted. About a week later, my roommate brought up the idea of using a Ouija board. My girlfriend is against it. My other roommate is against it. I become the deciding vote, and I say no so as to not piss off my girlfriend. Shit gets real. We can hear the desk chair upstairs roll around on its own. When you go to check it out, it's sitting in front of a window, looking out over a field. Every time, it's the same place. Roommate and I are musicians. We were trying to record some samples in the front door office. I had headphones on. Whilst playing some guitar over a drum pad, we both hear what sounded like every plate and glass gets smashed on the floor in the kitchen. It was loud. We both drop everything and run into the kitchen, and there's nothing. Nothing out of place. Weird. We both couldn't believe what we heard and there was no mess. We started to wonder if we were going crazy. While pooping in the downstairs bathroom, right next to the rabbit hole, it sounded like an animal was scratching at the back of the door, trying to get into the bathroom from the basement. But the scratches were up near the top of the door, and I could see it moving the door. Called the landlord and said there's an animal in the basement. He sent a guy out the next day who cleared the basement. Said there's nothing. No animals, no poop, no point of entry. The basement is sealed tight. We would hear the scratching on that door spontaneously. Others experienced it as well while in the bathroom. The house started feeling creepy, almost oppressive. It wasn't how it used to be. Someone watching. It felt like you were being stalked. Roommates and I were chilling in the main living room, playing Borderlands. We heard a cat meowing, but it was an odd, quiet, screamy kind of meow. It was from upstairs. We paused the game and head to the stairs. Once on the landing, I could see the tuxedo cat yelping and looking like he was pinned down. The Garfield cat was a few feet away, just staring and looked like a statue. I reached for him under the railing. As soon as I did, he sprang up and jumped through the railing, clutching onto me. The Garfield cat did the same, but used the roommate as a backboard, jumping off him down the stairwell. Neither wanted to go past my bedroom door, where the tuxedo cat was pinned down. We went down to the living room and just dealt with what just happened. We decided the house was haunted. Across the street was a neighbour. Nice guy in his 50s, lovely wife, a son about 6 years old. We would stand in his garage watching the NFL drink beer, all around a great relationship with them. I decided to ask him one day if he ever heard anything about the place being strange or haunted. He says, "Funny you say that. The previous tenant said she thought there was an old lady there. I don't believe that stuff, but now you're saying it. Her two kids used to wave to someone whenever they left. She used to feel like someone was there. My son started waving at the house too. I thought it was little kids being kids. I found it hard to believe whatever old lady in the house was trying to scare us and kill my cat. Then, we found the Ouija board. Girlfriend and I were gone for the night. Came back the next evening. Roommate was getting out of the mudroom at the back of the house. Not unusual, but he looked super pale and sick. He's a dark-skinned Mexican fellow, so it was easy to see he looked pale and flush. My girlfriend had to leave and go straight to work, so I was basically just getting dropped off. He told me what happened the night before. C is boyfriend roommate, A is girlfriend roommate. A person who was really into paranormal activities, ghosts, spirituality, etc., brought a Ouija board into the house months before, after she asked if she could do, and we voted no. She did it anyway. She was using it when no one was home and had it hidden in the basement because she knew none of us ever went down there. The Ouija board was her mom's from the 60s or 70s, homemade, wooden, hand-painted letters and numbers. A few extra words like soon, never, later. She also said that her mother had used it for years, and there was always someone called David attached to the board, and David was not nice. It all made sense now. There's an old lady spirit in the house, and she's pissed about David. The night A confessed to the Ouija board, she convinced C to do some EVPs with her. There were 3. Basement. It was muddy. Very fuzzy, but you could hear someone distinctly say A's name. I thought maybe we were hearing what we wanted to hear. I wasn't sold on it. Main floor. It was them walking around asking questions. Are you here? What's your name? Etc. You didn't really hear much. However, there was a lot of scratchy, fuzzy bursts like a hissing sound. Weird, but still not convinced. The stairwell. Recording was as follows from the top of the stairs. Look at the cat. He looks pissed. He sees someone. Thump. Then a louder thump. The thump. You can hear the squeal of its tires. Claws against the roof taking off. Look at him go. You okay? End of recording. To me, the thump sound was like something heavy hitting a couple stairs, then dropping some massive weight at the top of the stairs. The peculiar thing is C claimed they didn't hear anything until they played it back. By this time, it's winter in Wisconsin. There's deep snow, large drifts through the property. He tells me they used the board. They were talking to David. David was tired of talking to A. He told C about his dad being in prison in Mexico when he was a young man, about coming to the basement to see David. He hated the woman in the house because she's always stopping him from doing things, watching everyone while they sleep, hating cats, watching the girlfriend and I get intimate when no one is home, including some of the kinkier stuff no one knows about. Finally ended with C asking if he wants to know when he'll die. When C said he wants David to leave, he said he can, but won't. The whole thing took a few hours before C finally let go of the planchette and said enough. We were now in the living room as he's telling me the story of the night before. The board is on the coffee table in the middle of the room. I'm standing with my back to the bathroom door and the door to the rabbit hole. I get this insane electric chill down my neck and spine, goosebumps that almost hurt, and I can hear the rabbit hole door getting scratched. I break for the board and say, we have to get rid of this thing. Where the fuck do we put it? At that moment, we hear the doorknob to the mudroom rattle. As we look into the kitchen, the door starts slowly opening to the mudroom. The lights are on, and there's no one there. The initial shock was unfathomable, but I knew right away the old lady opened the door, saying, get it the fuck out of the house. We stood for a moment and worked the nerve to even move. We looked at each other, amazed and terrified. I'm taking it to the garage, don't know where else to put it. We got on our boots and coats. I wrapped the board in a paper bag and off we went. It was an almost a 3 acres walk that I had the small path shoveled out to the garage because I was still parked there. It was a calm night. Stars were out and the snow was really bright. As we were walking, I was carrying the board. It felt like David was following us. Just an angry tantrum feeling, like we were leaving a room where a toddler was screaming and kicking the wall. The man door was old and was held closed by a bent nail you had to spin to keep it shut. I put it on a shelf high up and left. As we left, we heard cans falling off the shelves, WD-40 and spray paint, etc. But I wasn't about to turn around and check on it. Once arriving back at the house, we felt immediate relief. Like an air purifier was running. Everything felt clean. Once again, though, we were startled when the back door opened. We automatically prepared for the worst. We waited for the mudroom to open. It was my other friend, who was a regular to the house, so much so he would walk right in. He saw us looking terrified and asked what happened. We gave him a sigh of relief. He'd had his own experiences in the house and knew we were serious. We sat and chatted for hours about the whole ordeal. Mind you, there are a lot of experiences in that house I haven't touched on, but these were some of the major ones. Undeniably, paranormal. This happened on October 5th, 2008. I remember the date since we were on our way home from my cousin's wedding and my sister's baby shower was the next day. My husband and I left the wedding around 10 p.m. As family weddings go, it was a long day. We didn't drink alcohol since we knew we had a lot to do the next day and drive home. This wedding was hosted in a town we are familiar with, and this story is based on roads we've driven thousands of times in the dark and in daylight. This is fall in a small, quaint northeastern town. My husband is a non-believer and never agreed with my POV on ghosts and spirits, but we've made it work. We leave the wedding and are driving home. My mind is filled with how late it is and how much I have to do tomorrow to get the shower set up. I'm really hoping everything is perfect and that I haven't forgotten to prepare anything. As we make a left and go up a small incline, I see this mist off to the right. It's about 5 feet swirl up and approximately 8 feet into the yard. My brain automatically shoots over to, that's weird. Why is a storm drain in the middle of the yard? It looked very similar to the condensation one would see from a New York City vent. Moisture that most of us know and are familiar with when the ground is warmer than the air. I'm still hyper-focused on why this drain is in the middle of the yard as we drive by. I look to the ground where the mist is hovering. As I'm looking down into the yard, I see the drain. My husband yells, "Oh my God, did you see that?" He curses all the time, but up until that point I've known him, he had never yelled, "Oh my God," before. Shocked, I reply, "What? That strangely placed drain?" Shakily he replied, "No, that lady." I didn't see a lady. I was looking. She was see-through, wearing old-fashioned clothing and standing there in the yard. You were looking out the window. That's when I realised the mist he saw was potentially a ghost, and the mist I picked up as a strange placement for a storm drain were one and the same. I find it fascinating that we both picked up on it as something out of place. My rational mind said the storm drain, while my husband decided something else that made him look right at it. Whatever it was, ghost or condensation, it's been a fun campfire story to tell. December 23, 2000. I just flew in from college for winter break. It was a late arrival and had to drive close to an hour home from the airport. After spending some time catching up with my mum and grandma, I decided I needed to sleep. My room shared with my sister had been left unchanged. She was not there that night. It's now early morning, Christmas Eve. To set the scene, this house and room are small. It's a very small one-level ranch home. The room was a box big enough for one twin bed on one side of the room and my twin bed on the other. Offset parallel, set up that the heads and pillow area were opposite of each other, and the ends of the beds overlap by a few feet. Basically, a head-to-toe format. There's approximately 2 or 3 inches between the beds. Anyway, from my bed I can see out the door, down the hallway where our bathroom was, and I could see just past that to the beginning of the dining room. My mom and grandma stayed in the family room with the TV on, and this is just by the dining room. Again, in a small house, you can hear everyone and everything with little effort. Anyway, I roll to my side and look over to the corner where my sister's head would normally be on her pillow. I see this odd white glow in the corner over her head. I stay to watch because I get the sense it's okay. Only love. In the past with any paranormal event, I usually noped right out of there or was afraid. This white glow is in the shape of what I believe is an angel. I can see that it's tall, the head, wings outline, then I see a figure that's standing in front of it. This figure is white and glowing as well, but I can see two separate shapes. It steps out, places its hands together in a prayer sign, and bows. It backs up and it disappears. When reality sets in with what I just saw, frozen now that fear has taken over, I yell for my grandma. Grandma! What? Can you turn the hall light on? I just saw a ghost. She turns the hall light on, and I remember her saying, 20 years old and still believes in ghosts, and needs a light on. I felt mad at that point, for mocking me for believing in something she has had experiences with. Yes, it was the family that said they believed in ghosts, but the minute one of us kids would have an experience, it wasn't credible, and just our imagination. I fell asleep and woke around 6 a.m. to the phone ringing. It was an unexpected call, and I heard my grandma talking to the caller and began crying. Her uncle had unexpectedly passed away in the night after having minor surgery to remove a small patch of skin carcinoma. He was in his late 70s. This was her favourite and oldest uncle, the only one I knew that she spoke with. Now looking back, it makes sense since they were only about 10 years apart in age. I never met him since he lived a few states away. Funny to only know someone by a few mail correspondences and phone conversations. My grandma would go visit him as a break from us. I remember she spent most of Christmas Eve mourning in her bedroom. Family comes over in the evening, which are her sons, my uncles. I'm in my room and they're in the dining room table, talking, and I heard my name mentioned and I began listening. I heard my grandma talk about a 20-year-old seeing things and needing her grandma to turn the light on. They all laugh. And then I hear my one uncle call for me. I go out to them knowing what they were just talking about. He asks me to tell them what I saw. I tell them. Right as I was finishing, my grandma shoots up and runs to her room and slams the door. She's crying. The focus is off of me and my one uncle is at her door asking what's wrong. She lets my uncle in. About 20 minutes later, he comes out and tells my other uncle and I, very seriously, that my grandma was upset because she'd just figured it out. Her uncle came to say goodbye to her. The angel arrived the same time her uncle died, in the room she slept in when her uncle last visited many years ago. And his way of saying goodbye was with the prayer hands and bow. This one has always been a fun one to tell. My husband doesn't believe in the paranormal and thinks it's a bunch of nonsense. At this point, we were still early on in our relationship and living together for a couple of years. He bought an old 1929 house in a suburb near the big city we grew up close to. I would often see the shadows move out of the corner of my eyes and began having a sense that our energy was not the only one there. Nothing too concerning. We had a £120 American black lab, so it could easily be her moving through the house. Or we can explain it away that maybe the neighbours backed in and the lights just hit the windows just right. One day, I told my guy that I saw a small black shadow walk into the laundry room. I wasn't taken seriously. Has to be some reasonable explanation. I mentioned it because it wasn't an out of the corner of my eye experience this time. The laundry room is in the finished basement. The only windows are glass block windows with a vent, and they're etched and foggy. There are 4x3 blocks, whatever the standard basement window size is. This part of the basement, the windows face into our backyard. There are no lights coming in from traffic, The houses were built in an old apple orchard, so the backyards were long, about half an acre. About 1 acre between our house and the house I was backed up to. We had an 8-foot wooden fence along the property line, no outside light source. A few weeks later, we're getting ready to go to the store together. I was finishing some laundry and he was in the basement finishing up something on the computer that was down there, to the left of the laundry room door. He asked me to put the dog in her crate while he finishes up. He'll just be a minute longer. The crate is in the basement, but behind to the right of where my guy is sitting. The laundry room door is open. All the lights are off now, except for the hall light on top of the stairs in the PC. I'm now standing at the end of the stairs, facing my guy, and he's looking at the computer. Black Shadow Dog walks into the laundry room. My guy says, "I thought you put the dog into her crate." "Nah, thought you were going to." He calls the dog. I'm looking at our dog in her crate. Now he's losing his patience since there were things in the laundry room he doesn't want her to eat or get into. "Can you please get the dog?" "What dog?" "Fine, I'll do it." At this point, I ask him to turn around and look in the crate. Look at the crate, look back at the computer. You saw it, didn't you? You saw the black shadow go into the laundry room too. Only time he ever admitted that he saw something in that house. I used to work for an older man who needed someone to clean his house while he worked. And being a 21-year-old needing money, I did it. He paid $12.50 an hour, so it seemed like a good deal at the time. It was a super nice house, and I was surprised something so nice was in the area, but it was excluded from everything else, almost in the middle of nowhere. My first day there wasn't bad. I got there, met him, and started in one of the bathrooms in the kitchen. But then it started once he left for work. I was on the phone with my nana because I didn't want to feel alone in such a big place. I was looking around the second story while talking to my nana, and as I came down the stairs, I heard something in the kitchen. It startled me, so I went and looked, and a dish had fallen off the counter. I ended up cleaning like normal and went home. Over the next few days, even stranger things happened. There were times I felt like I was being watched. Times where one of the showers sounded like someone was standing in it and slowly moving in it. I even found a box that contained pictures of this man and some other men naked, but the other things seemed worse than that. The worst started when I was eating and watching Charmed. I heard a loud crash in one of the upstairs rooms. It sounded like someone knocked over the desk that was in there. It scared me so bad, I ran out of the house and got my aunt to pick me up. The cops ended up being called, but they didn't care and barely checked the place. The entire time I worked there, I had these nightmares about the house, and the one time my boyfriend visited the house, he had a nightmare of our friend group killing themselves in it. There were other little things that seemed off as well, such as the cat never really wanting to be in the house, and if he was in the house, he stayed under the bed. There was reddish-brown stains in one of the rooms on the floor in bed. Another room had dead birds in it. And in the yard, I saw something white peeking out from the ground, and I picked it up, and it was a picture frame wrapped in a cloth, and it was a memorial pamphlet for a man. The last day I worked there was the worst. I was there alone, and I heard the crash again and was outside. I tried to get my uncle to pick me up, but he told me he didn't care and that I had to stay. So my boyfriend began on his way over, which takes about an hour. So I called my nana while I waited outside for my boyfriend. I was on speakerphone, so my sister could talk to me too. They asked me who I was there with, which freaked me out, because I was alone, because they heard a woman's voice. And my boyfriend later told me he heard it too, even though I never mentioned that my nana and sister heard it first. My boyfriend picked me up, and I never went back to that house. To this day, that was one of the scariest things I've experienced. I was hired onto a job in an assisted living facility with approximately 20 or so residents. There was a few times I've seen this thing, but not as well this one time. As I said, I've worked in this assisted living facility working 2 to 10 p.m. when night fell. They were simply the worst times for me. While working or walking the halls to make sure my residents were safe, I felt watched. And not just watched like my other co-worker, or residents, mind you. The evening shift only had 2 staff members after 6, until the next shift arrived. As I said, I felt watched, and it creeped me out. And it didn't help knowing that this facility sat basically surrounded by the woods. But the small town was haunted, and known to be the most haunted in the US. It was one evening in November. It was time residents cleared and headed off to bed, so for mine and my co-worker working with me, as well as this night, meant downtime. We decided to go outside for some fresh air and just play on our phones. That's when something told me to look, and I turned my head and saw a tall man in all black facing us through one of the side door windows, facing the side porch where we were sitting. This man or thing had a top hat on, covering half his face. I don't know what I did or why I had to look away for a slight second, but I did, and when I looked again, he was gone. So a few years ago, I had this strange encounter. My wife is a key element in this, so I'm going to describe him just a bit. She has super long black hair that she always kept in a bun. She wore these pajama pants that were patterned like cartoon sky with clouds and all that. She wore a robe that was red and blue horizontal stripes. Also, she doesn't often smile. So I went to bed with my black cat curled up next to me, and I dreamt I was in a hospital with Tyrion Lannister and Lord Varys from the Game of Thrones, and there's a sick man in the bed. I decided to go walk in the car, and while I'm waiting, a tornado comes and I wake up. Now, when I woke up, I noticed my wife was lying across my legs staring at me and smiling. And I thought, what the fuck is she doing? She's so weird sometimes. So I started to tell her about my dream. She's smiling at me the whole time with her head tilted down slightly, and I suddenly noticed that my cat is gone. I didn't say anything about it, but then my wife says I put her in the leeches, and starts gently tickling my belly with long sharp nails. I chuckled and said, "What?" And she said it again, tickling my belly, and I noticed that her robe and pants pattern was swapped, and her hair was down and not in a bun. Then I noticed her smile was just a tad wider than it should be, and I started to become terrified and woke up again, my cat curled up right next to me. The strange thing is that I'm not the only one who has encountered this entity. 2 others have also seen this wicked version of my wife in a semi-dreamlike state. I swear to the gods that I was awake during this encounter. Nothing about it felt like a dream. But I woke up a second time. That's never happened to me before. Has anyone else had an encounter like this?